Thanks, Anubhuti. And thanks a lot, everyone, for making time for this masterclass. Thank you, CSR Box, for giving us this opportunity as well. Uh, as Anubhuti introduced us, that's Anant, I'm Shashank, and I've forgotten the pointer. So, who are we? Bridgespan is an advisor and a knowledge provider to the sector. We are a global nonprofit. We were incubated by Bain and Company in the year 2000. For the last 22 years, we have been working across four major areas. We work with funders, with philanthropies, with CSR on strategy and organizational effectiveness type of projects. We work on NGOs and nonprofit strategy consulting. We also create cohort-based coaching opportunities for NGO teams. And finally, whatever we learn from these activities, we try and share with the larger sector. So all our reports, all our toolkits, we try to make them open source under the Creative Commons license. All of that is available for the sector to use. We are a 450 people strong organization across US, Africa, India, and Southeast Asia. And we have directly advised more than $10 billion of funding over the past several years. If we look at our client portfolio, 16 of the top 50 givers as per Forbes are part of our partners. 30 of the largest 50 foundations in the world. Leading funder collaboratives, global funder collaboratives, we have supported them. And in India as well, we have been supporting leading CSR, including one of the top 5 CSR organizations in India. We have been working with them. So Mahindra, Tata Steel, Axis Bank, some of our client names are confidential, but basically the experience that we bring is by working with these people who are looking at how to invest their money in the social sector more thoughtfully. We learn from them, and that's what we wanted to share with all of you. Sorry. Amongst our clients in India, so we work with both nonprofits and with funders. The idea is that what we learn from nonprofits, we integrate in our work with the funders and vice versa. We try to bridge that gap between the funders and the nonprofit through our work. Some of our clients, so for example, with Mahindra, we have been working with them on developing a vertical strategy, the strategy to create women's economic empowerment for 1 million women annually by the year 2026. With Axis Bank Foundation, similarly, we worked on the foundation strategy to help them focus on rural livelihood and create a target of 2 million households that they wanted to support. With Piramal Swasthya and Piramal Foundation, it was a multi-year engagement with them where we started with looking at tribal health strategy and helped them form a collaborative. So Anamaya is a collaborative, it's a multi-stakeholder collaborative between NGOs, funders, the government, which is focusing explicitly on improving the tribal health outcomes. And similarly for Tata Steel, we have worked on looking at their program portfolio, helping them identify which ones are the most impactful, and hence create a strategy which help them focus on few signature programs. Apart from that, we also work on things like strategic evaluation of programs. We help in organizational development of partner organizations, the NGOs that the funders support. On the NGO side, again, strategy, operating model are our bread and butter, but in addition, we also work with NGOs in a cohort-based coaching model. So in a 3 to 6 month window, we work with teams of NGO, a 3 to 5 member team from the NGO, coaching them on specific aspects like developing next line of leadership or achieving strategic clarity. So that's the Bridgespan Nonprofit Development Program, which is a cohort-based program, which allows us to work with smaller NGOs as well, because it's much more less cost intensive for the NGOs to take. So, sorry, the pointer, I'm still not used to it. I talked about our knowledge work, and some of our resources are, some of the relevant resources could be, we looked at 8 high profile, high impact CSR programs in India, engaged with them extensively to identify what were the common characteristics that we could draw. So that's the Building High Impact CSR program report. We worked in partnership with Bain and Company to look at how the philanthropic ecosystem in India was growing. What was the future of domestic philanthropy in India? That's the first report that we are talking about. And in the second one, we looked at how this relationship between the NGOs and the funders, it was not really a relationship. It was becoming more and more a transaction. And what was needed to change that? How do two potential partners really look at this relationship as a relationship or a partnership? That's what we looked at and what we are working on in a multi-year initiative called Pay What It Takes. I'll move on to the next part of my agenda, which is to talk about why are we talking about CSR. I think all of us know that CSR is extremely important for the Indian social sector. India is a leader in adopting laws which create compliance to them, but at the same time, there's a potential that CSR has, which we are not really tapping. CSR right now is around 25,000 crore annual spend, so it was around US dollar 3.2 billions in FY21, but it's expected to grow 3 times. It will become $10 billion by the year 2026. It is the fastest growing segment of philanthropic funding in India. The foreign funding is reducing, but this is the sector, this is the funding which is expected to grow. So it's around 20% right now, but it's expected to grow to 31%. So it's very important for us as CSR heads, as people who are working on this funding, to understand how critical it is for nations' development. And it will become more and more important as we go forward. Uh, sorry. Yeah. And globally, it has been very clearly demonstrated that socially responsible organizations have a distinct advantage over others. Whether it's customer, whether it's talent, the human resources, whether it's investor or the community. All 4 of them prefer to deal with more socially responsible organizations. Businesses which engage in better social responsible practices are able to retain people more. There was a study in US, we don't have a similar study in India yet, but in a US study, what came out was almost 2/3 of millennials would prefer to work with a more socially responsible organization. 83% of them said that they will be more loyal to an organization which is more socially responsible. So if we want as a business to retain good talent, it's important for us to look at how socially responsible we are as a business, and CSR forms a very critical component of that. Similarly, when we talk about investment, ESG investment or ESG is becoming a very important criteria. Bain and Company conducted a survey of limited partners of private funders, so large private equity funders. What came out was 70% of limited partners had a very clear ESG consideration in their investment thesis. 93% of them would not invest in a company if there was an ESG concern. So it's no longer possible for businesses to think about business separate, community and society separate. It's important for the businesses to look at themselves as an integral part of the society, as an integral part of the community, and look at CSR as a strategic tool to make businesses better. If we, to quote Tiger Tyagarajan, basically there are 4 stakeholders that a business is dealing with. It's customers, the employees, the shareholders or investors, and the communities. And all 4 are equally important. Hence, it's important to look at CSR as a part of overall strategy. And that's what we wanted to talk about. We believe that if that is done, we can move away from a compliance mindset where we are looking at it as something that has been thrust upon us from the law to really understanding what's the potential of CSR and looking at it from the perspective of nation building and making it transformational. With this, I'll hand it over to Anant.
Thank you. And, thanks for everyone joining here. I'll just emphasize one point that my colleague made and then move on from there. And I just want to check, like, how many of you are actively either, running leadership roles in CSR or part of CSR teams? Quick show of hands. Yeah. Okay, so about half of, maybe slightly more than half. I did want to spend a minute on this, which is, it starts here. If CSR is framed as something which is happening because there's a law, the tendency that organizations have is to do the very minimum one needs to put people into those roles with a lot of mindset of scarcity, to almost constantly think of this as a burden. I'd love for us to reframe this a little, and this is also just a, maybe a point, to CSR box, is the day we can coin the term CSI. And what is CSI? CSI is corporate social impact. What does it mean? If you look at ESG, there is a lot of focus on the G, right? So if you are not having good governance, you'll get punished by the investors. We know companies in India and abroad which essentially have had, CEOs changed. If the governance practice, so the G part is working. It's also something where there is very clear board training. The number of trainings board members have to go through for G is not funny. Like, so any of you who, work with board members, you'll realize how well aware they are. And these are largely mandated by the government. The E part is a carbon play. And the large part of the E is how do I either reduce my emissions of carbon due to my core ops, or try to reduce the amount of carbon which is left in the environment. So it's essentially a carbon play. What is completely missed out in ESG is the S. And that's why it brings us back to CSI. If this leadership group can reframe what they do as CSI, and what is CSI? CSI is CSR plus the S of ESG. Then it's no longer something which can be at the sidelines, like the CEO of Genpact says quite well. It is very unlikely that the company which does not focus on CSI will actually exist in 10 years' time. And this is something which is blatantly evident now to most people. Two things will happen over time. One is tokenistic practices will be called out. Like, one of the things I see here, and I'm happy to see that, is there's almost equal representation of women in this room. But the time that tokenistic practices can let a company go on for a long time are over. And the reason are twofold. One, there is very strong reporting now, especially led by social media. And secondly, the reality is it is more and more unlikely that if we are not giving back to society, a company will have the license to operate. So this is an important point to just start this conversation, which is, this is not a CSR conversation. This is a conversation on how a company can exist in 10 years. And if CSI does not happen, it could very well be that the company ceases to exist, which is then the reason why CEOs need to think of this. So I'll sort of come to the first main point, and we, just to make it lighthearted and a little bit fun, we think there are 5 superpowers that you all have. At the end, my colleague Shashank will do a quiz to, ask you to self-introspect. How many of the superpowers have you fully, it's a bit like Hanuman, right? Like, you have the superpower, but maybe all of the superpowers are not yet being used. But we want to highlight what are these 5 superpowers. I think the first one is to very clearly position this as a CEO agenda. This is not a CSR head agenda. This is not a HR head agenda. This is not a CSR team agenda. This is a CEO agenda. If a CEO does not understand that, it is our duty to explain why it is a CEO agenda. And the reason is threefold. One is, if you truly want to make transformative, and Shashank spoke about the fact that today we have 3+ billion. It's not a small number. In a few years, we'll have $10 billion going through CSR. It is more than the total spend today. So, in some ways, the fact that the money is there makes it even more important to make sure the money goes the full distance. But the money will not go the full distance if the CEO is not treating it as one of the items on her or his scorecard. And the reason is simple, is CSI is more than what a CSR organization or CSR team, even a team which is working super hard with NGOs, can actually do. CSI means you apply the full power of the organization, all the capabilities, make it almost an organizational mandate. That first point is also important because in the conversations we have been having, and I'd encourage you to go through the Future of Domestic Philanthropy report, CEOs who are strategic minded or in a long, in a tenure in which they are creating their legacy, they are all thinking of this in a very meaningful way. The converse is CEOs who are not thinking of this, it could be argued that they have a very short tenure ahead of them, because it is not going to be acceptable in most companies to not actually have an agenda where we are doing good for the society in a meaningful manner. So I think that first point brings it back to saying, how does this happen? One practical example of how this can be done, and this has been done by Mahindra and others as well. CEOs make a commitment to their investors on their social agenda in the external world. And they do this because once you make an external commitment, it's no longer a prerogative of the CSR team. The CSR team is a great enabler, but investors will ask you what happened. The fact that Mahindra has gone and said, look, we are focusing on women's economic empowerment. This is what we mean. And our goal is 1 million women to be empowered. And of course, it might take time, but that number is not an internal metric. It's now an external metric. It might seem hard to do, but once it's done, it makes it actually very powerful because you get all the resources of the organization. I think the second one is, thinking of how to make CSR a key topic in one or two board members' agenda and forum. Board members have a unique role because they have huge expertise, but they also have connections with the external world. If it's a woman board member, it's even better. So one of the practical tips is there one board member who actually wants to be a champion of the social impact? Again, the combination of a CEO and a board member is a very important combination for the transformation to actually happen. We will come to a little bit of where we are on the journey of that. One of the metrics to track is how much time does the CEO spend every month or every 3 months on deep discussions on the CSR agenda. We find that 1 day a month of deep discussions, review, improvement planning, course correction, brainstorming is par for the course. It is not demanding too much. Sanjeev, who's the CEO of Unilever, actively spends that time, and in fact, some of the biggest innovations they have had, where they have used, the brand management capability of Lifebuoy to actually promote hand washing and make sure that it's done in a way that the best brand managers are working on that campaign, was only enabled because end of the day, the CEO was brainstorming and supporting. And the last point really is, this group has a very important role of, there is a regulation which is very powerful. It is bringing in money. But that regulation, along with bringing in money, is also bringing in behaviors which are not conducive. It is not bringing in trust into the room. In fact, it is bringing the opposite of trust. It's all about reporting. It's all about risk mitigation. This group has a role to play to be an insulation layer and not transmit those same behaviors into the NGOs. This group can either be as compliance oriented as the regulation, or this group can say, look, yes, there is money, the regulation is not perfect, but can we actually be the insulation layer to make sure what happens in the field is actually very different from the mindset of compliance which is actually coming in through the regulation. This is important also because the time it will take the regulation to change will be very long. But the time you need to actually change your mindsets is instantaneous. So you can make the change now. So this was the first superpower, and you know, as you can see, there's a reason this is the first one. Because वो कहते हैं ना कि if this doesn't happen, don't bother with the rest. It will be a good program, there will be compliance, there will be money well spent, it will not be transformational. What is the second superpower? The second superpower is, making choices. It's hard to make choices because everything you will do is going to be good. The way we think about it is doing good is not good enough. And doing good is not good enough for a very simple reason. You're not comparing with not doing good. You're comparing with, is this the very best you can be? What we find is today, 83% of the grants which go to NGOs are 1 year in duration. Yeah, 83%. What we find is more than half of the grants are less than 50 lakhs. Now imagine, in India, like if you were to do anything, think of the smallest thing you want to do. Is it achievable in a year in the social sector? Like the chance is 0. Is it achievable with an amount of 50 lakhs? Very hard. Now, the point is, these are bad behaviors which are encouraged by, the regulatory practice of compliance. But these behaviors will come in the way of transformation. Programs which are less than 3 to 5 years in duration have very little impact. In fact, it takes a year to even figure out what to do. It takes a year to figure out, okay, what is the mechanism I put in place to do it? So in some ways, if you think of the left side, there are 3 things which, we would put down for you to think about. And many of you are already trying to change that behavior. The first one is being short-term and, thinking of short-term outputs every quarter. In the for-profit world, many companies have said, we will not talk every quarter to investors. These are for-profit companies, right? They basically have said, we are out of this quarterly investor reporting. The reason is, even in the for-profit world, it's a very dysfunctional behavior because you are living quarter to quarter. And from past life at Bain & Company, I saw that, right? You can't solve anything quarter to quarter. And if in the for-profit world it is hard, imagine how hard it is in the social sector. So I'd request us to really introspect about anything less than 3 to 5 years, knowing full well that the regulation and the compliance nature of the regulation makes it hard. I think the second point is fragmentation. The point about if you had, X amount of money and you broke it into 10 pieces, and you had, that same X amount of money and it broke it into just 2 pieces. Which of the 2 and let's for a minute assume that both of those things are equally valuable, equally impactful. Which of these 2 situations do you think will have more overall impact? And given the topic, I think you can guess like where I'm headed. Fragmentation is the killer of impact. In the for-profit world, they say complexity is the killer of growth. In this world, fragmentation is the killer of impact. It feels like we are diversifying. It feels like we are doing many, many nice things. 1,000 flowers are blooming. They don't bloom. The reality is the 1,000 flowers will be planted. They will all wither. Unless you actually put in the resources to make that flower or make that seed grow into a tree, it will not actually lead to results. So if you were to take a look at that, the more we are moving away from fragmentation, doesn't mean one thing. It may be 2 things. But if you're trying to do more than 3 things, which are truly transformational, it is impossible to imagine. The ideal situation is choose one and go for broke. But sometimes you have to choose 2 because, you are also mitigating certain risks. But, try not to go more than 3. again, this is very counter to prevailing mindsets because, there is a, even in our own career, I personally believed this earlier when I was in, consulting, like, okay, I'm chasing 10 opportunities, ek to ho hi jayega. Doesn't work that way. If I chase 2 opportunities, the chance that one of the 2 will convert is way better than if I choose 10. It is a human mindset of wanting to diversify risk, but it actually doesn't help. And the last one, what Shashank talked about, was really thinking of how do we move to a strategic partnership. The very simple way to think about that is, when you are not in the room, what is that other person talking about you? When you're in the room, they'll speak nice things about you. When you're not in the room, what is the NGO saying? And as we sort of sit in the middle, so we have no money, right? So we sit in the middle, we chat with a lot of NGOs. There are some funders about which the NGOs say, look, I love them. Of course, they give us money, but they are patient, they listen, they are curious, they are like supportive, they are giving good inputs, but they are also very, very respectful in that process. And they are not in a hurry. They are a little bit with us. But that is the rarity. So thinking about how you are perceived, and this is something you cannot do if you are in the room. This only happens when you are not in the room. I'd leave this as the second superpower, and just to remind us that this is possible. A large metals mining company, which we can't name, actually moved away from supporting close to like 75 projects, which were over a multiplicity of more than 15 odd areas, to focusing a very large chunk to 4 areas. We were like nudging them to focus on 2, but it was 4. But it was a dramatic change from where they started. It was hard for them initially, but afterwards they were actually happy because they realized that they can go deeper and they have more resources to put into it. Again, this cannot happen if the first point doesn't happen, because unless someone actually really supports that decision, it is very easy to say, okay, board member 1 wants A, board member 2, someone else 3. So let's do something to keep everyone happy. The big request is, don't do something to keep everyone happy. That usually is the opposite of transformative impact. I'm going to pause at this point and check whether there are any immediate questions. Otherwise, we have an exercise. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so Arun from Magic Bus. So I think whatever you've just mentioned, I think for practitioners like all of us sitting here, this deeply resonates what you said. There are 1 or 2 only comments I wanted to make. For example, when you look at an agreement and you say it's a 1-year agreement, and then you compute all your numbers on 1 year, it's not necessarily right, because what we see in Magic Bus is that a lot of these guys sign 1-year agreement, and then at the end of the year they renew it. As long as the program is high impact, there is a high level of governance, and the money is spent on time. The reason is they don't want to really tie it up for 4 years because this whole CSR law and the money and the spending, etc. So obviously, our board also asks us, how many agreements you have, which is 3 years. I said, it really doesn't matter. And what matters is the continuity. So I think for people who are computing this, they need to include this as one of the components. The second question, I'm sure you will sort of cover, is this whole area of fragmentation. Organizations support 90, 100, and it's impossible in my mind. How do you monitor them? So maybe I'm interested in
Sure.
figuring
Yeah.
that out also.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Arun. I know you raised your. Maybe you can pass the mic. We are taking notes, so we will come back together to many of them. Yeah, please.
I'm Rakesh. I represent Jalodbas, empowered sanitation systems we are building. 2 very short questions. One is, you continuously talk about NGOs. What about social for profit? Second would be, now CSR spend by a company which supports their core business. Wouldn't that be fair enough? What's wrong if it doesn't? and those sectors who want to do something which is not connected to the core. So how can we justify? Thanks.
Sure, thank you, thank you. Are there any other questions? And we'll get into the exercise. I think it's already been circulated. Maybe we'll take 2 more questions and then we'll, please go on.
Anand, my name is Gaurav Arora. I come from Salam Bombay Foundation and NGO, but I've been on the corporate side. I work with Tatas in CSR. The point I want to really make is that when I was in the corporate side, the buzzword was impact, and everyone talked about it. I think one of the words that we are hearing today, very, very loud and clear, is "paisa khatam hua ki nahi." And I know, you brought about the compliance side. I think, but the favorite word of corporate today, because of the funding cycle is 1 year. So what I'm saying is that, and I completely agree with you when you said that, don't focus on the compliance side. Okay, but however, there is so much of pressure also on the corporate, and then, that pressure passed on to NGO to make sure that, 31st March को पैसा खत्म हुआ कि नहीं हुआ. So in that, process, how do you really think impact? And how do you really, strike a right balance between the two?
Can I ask a very quick question? Hi, I'm Richa from Narayana's Art Nirbhar Bharat Foundation. We're working on making rural India art nirbhar, financially self-reliant on the arts. So corporates have very clear UNDP given agendas, that mandates that have clearly defined goals for them. Art and culture kind of fall behind. Yesterday, at the dinner time, we were having that conversation that there's so few players in the field of arts. Is it catching up, or is there hope for us in days to come?
Are there any questions from CSR folks? We've only had questions from NGOs so far, which is also interesting. Maybe I think there was one last question, and or should we just get into the exercise? Do you want to do a question? Yeah.
Hi Anand, this is Utkarsha here from PSR Sustainability, and we've been into impact assessment space for the past 5 years, and with the recent amendments we've been seeing a lot of interest in impact assessments, but all we see and all we have been hearing for the past 1 year is impact in the quantitative sense, कि कितने numbers हुए, कितने stakeholders तक पहुँच पाए. So when we talk about making CSR top leadership's agenda, how do we consider the qualitative aspect of it as to impact of it when we're talking about like discussing agendas with the top leadership? So how do we go about it?
So these are great thought starters, and we'll have time for Q&A, and we'll make sure, Shashank and I will make sure we bring these back. I think these are great points, and just to get us now into exercise mode, I think we have all received, hopefully, worksheet. Yeah. So, we have 2 requests. First, take 5 minutes and just focus on the first question, which is in your organization, and this question is directed at CSR, members. How often do you engage with the CEO on this topic? Think about that. And how deeply do you engage? And the second question really is, is that person already a champion? By champion, it's like, okay, in a review, it's not that you are presenting, it's that it's being co-created, there is brainstorming, there is support. If not, who could be a potential champion? Take 5 minutes and just jot down your thoughts on this. And again, this is all for your personal self-reflection. We will circle back on a few thoughts coming up from this subsequently. Secondly, after the 5 minutes, take the next 5 minutes to just put down on those 3 dimensions, on being bold, on being long-term, and on being focused. Where do you think you are? And there are some, questions out there which gives you a sense of, relative scale. Again, the objective here is not to be prescriptive, but to say, okay, I'm actually very good on being focused. I'm not fragmented at all. Give yourself a self-assessment on that, and put down a little bit of data for your reflection itself. Take not more than 5 minutes. So again, this is a very quick pass. At the end of 10 minutes, just show of hands saying you are done, and we'll have a quick follow-on. But it'll be great if you could take that next 10 minutes to just jot down your thoughts. Thank you. Does everyone have the worksheet? They do? Okay. Yes, yes, thank you for asking. NGOs can attempt it, but from the perspective of CSR. So from the perspective of the people you are working with, who are your CSR donors, put it. Yeah.
From the NGO side, I would recommend probably identify one or two key CSR funders for you and think on their behalf, because in general we know what the answer will come. But if you think from the perspective of who are the most important CSR funders for you, and then think about these questions for them. Clarify, in the first question, we are expecting you people to put down names of individuals. Is there someone from the CXO suite who does that? Is there someone from the board who does that? Because that's the person that you need to really engage with. Or like in some companies, it may be someone from the promoter group, someone from the promoter family who may be doing it. And that's what will drive the real change in the CSR. Please do let me know if you're still working on this, or if you're done, please. Are there people who are still working on the exercise? No, it's for your self-use. All right, just to start, just to understand amongst the funders, amongst the CSR professionals out here, how many of you have a clear champion already there? Can we have a show of hands? Okay. Okay. And how many of you were able to identify a potential champion amongst the senior leadership? If you already don't have a champion, okay. So I think I think the best thing could be to do peer interaction after the session to understand how champions emerged amongst people who have those champions. But otherwise, some of those things is also about the CSR team reaching out to the senior leadership. So if there are some people in the senior leadership who are showing more interest, more in a questioning manner, then co-opting them in the solution, trying to seek their time in co-creating the solutions. That's one way in which some of our clients have worked on this issue of bringing in more championship. Engaging with them more often, showing the successes and sharing the failures. To say, okay, this is something that we tried, this didn't work. We would love to learn from your experience to see how this can be better. Like, effectively showing a degree of vulnerability to get them to engage is some of the ways in which some of the CSR organizations are able to create a greater level of ownership. I'll move to the second question now. Like, how many of CSR organizations, and this can be for the whole group, how many of you were able to identify that the CSR funder that you are thinking of, or you yourself, have clearly articulated impact goals? Just a quick show of hand. Okay. So I think just please, if you could just keep the hands up, please. So, because it's important to see this, that, and if the NGOs could put that down and funders can just keep it up. Basically, NGOs may not understand, but there are funders who are saying that there's no clear articulation of impact goals as well. And that's where I think the aspect of engaging with the senior leadership to articulate what drives them. Like, at the end of the day, philanthropy is a heart-driven activity. It's being imposed on businesses, but it is driven by heart. There has to be someone who believes or who really feels for a cause and says, this is some problem that I want to solve. So if you don't have a champion, if you don't have clearly articulated impact goals, I think that's where the point is, to understand where the interest of senior leadership will lie on social issues. What is it that if they had all the resources in the world, they would want to solve? And it could be for a small community, it could be for a population level change, that doesn't matter. But overall, what pulls their heartstrings becomes the question that you as the CSR team should be trying to answer for your senior leadership. I'll move on in the interest of time. Yeah, yeah.
And I think one of the things which we are happy to enable is, if you feel it's helpful for that CEO to either interact with peers or potentially think about who might be aspirational role models. Remember, CEOs also have role models. That's a great place to think about that. And again, very happy to enable that journey. It is hard, but once that happens, everything else will start becoming much easier. And just going back to a point which one of my NGO friends asked, which is, in the face of so much compliance questions, how do you actually think long term? How do you remain grounded, etc.? How do you stay strategic? The answer is, you need the CEO backing. Because if everyone is saying, look, you are the CSR head, I don't know what's happening, but make sure that nothing goes wrong, and everyone keeps putting the onus on you, believe me, you will not be able to resist the pressure. So it's quite important that finding the right sponsor or champion, and if you don't have that, do ask for help. Back to you, Shashank.
Sure. I'll move on to the third principle, which is about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So there's enough evidence, specifically when we talk about Dalit, Bahujan, and Adivasis, or we talk about the gender, that there is systemic marginalization in India. There's evidence that whether it's agriculture, whether it's professional employment, whether it's micro entrepreneurship or entrepreneurship, women are at a significant disadvantage. In agriculture, they take the most of the burden, but they earn less. In general, they have less access to capital. In general, they have less access to information. In general, they have less access to networks. So there's a systemic marginalization that happens on these axes. Similarly, when we talk about Adivasi populations, and a good resource will be the State of Adivasi Livelihood report by Pradhan, where they looked at different development indicators for Adivasis and non-Adivasi households in the same blocks. And it was clear that Adivasi populations were at a disadvantage. So it's important to see that our CSR programs are focused towards marginalized populations, have a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens in it. There's a benefit to it. There's what's called a curb cut effect, that when you create programs which are targeted towards the most disadvantaged, then they have a disproportionate impact. They also benefit others who you may not have intended, who you may not have taken as primary beneficiary. An example is Accenture's VACT program, which was focused on micro-entrepreneurship of women, but what it led to was increased school participation of children, both genders, and increased participation of male members of the family as the business expanded. The way to do it is, again, engage with the leadership, engage with the CEO, see what drives them, what pulls their heartstring, and identify which marginalized section of the population do you want to focus. Make it an explicit commitment by articulating your focus in your vision, in your reports, saying this is what we want to do. So example will be Axis Bank, where when they were looking at rural livelihood, they in their vision statement said, with a focus on women empowerment. So they wanted to reach out to 2 million households with a focus on women empowerment. So very clear gender inclusion in the mission statement itself ensured that all their programs were looking at the other challenges that women may face which men may not. Otherwise, what will happen is we're just creating a society which is more inequitable. And that will not be good for us in the long run. And finally, to actually make it happen, building the trust with the community that you want to serve, building that trust either by working directly with them if you're operating foundation and operating CSR, or partnering with NGOs who are closer to the community. So that's the way in which you can integrate a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. And again, that relates to how you can create a better impact. And we will come to the question of qualitative versus quantitative. There's a balance in this, but the depth of impact that you will be able to see through your CSR programs when you target and you focus on serving the most marginalized, that's much more disproportionate than just going after numbers. The other thing that good CSR programs do is they don't work in isolation. They understand that they are part of a larger social sector ecosystem. They are working together. They're not the only ones, and they're not the only ones driving change. So there's an element of partnership, and there's also an element of understanding that I'm not, like, it's not just my brand, it's not just me. There are multiple factors at play. Good CSR organizations partner with NGOs. They try to understand the challenges NGOs face. They try to focus on NGOs' capacity building. They try to provide advisory, like strategic advisory to their NGOs to improve programs. They work with the community. So Tata Steel Foundation very closely works with the community. When they implement their program, they have community sessions for the community members to talk about how the program is working out or not. They give that space to the community. They have a community member in the governance body itself. When in their CSR committee, they have a community representative who, and the lady is exceptional. She talks very clearly. She says, this is stupid. This will not work. Crap. So she's very straightforward, but that drives the program to be in the service of the community. Similarly, government as well. At the end of the day, 90% of social development funding is coming from the government. So it's important for the CSR organization to see where CSR can play a role of a viability gap funding or like enhancing the effectiveness of where the government is spending money. An example will be Piramal Swasthya, where they work with the government health system to improve the effectiveness. And working with other corporates, there are now a lot of examples where corporates are realizing that it's important for us to partner with others. Other corporates have complementary skill sets, and that's what we need to leverage as well. Example will be Mahindra Nanni Kali program, and this is an extremely critical example to understand because they partnered with Nandi Foundation, an NGO, to create the program, see that it's working. At the same time, they understood that there's only a limit to what they can scale it themselves. So there was a very clear call taken by Mahindra CSR to not hold this as a Mahindra Nanni Kali. It became Nanni Kali, which was an independent brand, and Nandi Foundation was given the flexibility to take it to Nandi Foundation took it to other corporates and created a greater scale than what an individual CSR could create. So the same Nanni Kali program is operating as Titan Kanya. The core is the same. The beneficiary or the community that they serve is the same. The scale is much more higher because as a corporate, the CSR decided it's not necessary for me to have my brand on that wall or on that poster. So yeah, I think, and in general, sorry, Anand.
CSR regulations prevent collaborative vehicles. Just raise your hands if, or you feel like the reason I'm not exploring it is I feel there might be an issue in CSR actually, working in a collaborative or with a collaborative vehicle. How many of us, raise of hands, anyone? Okay, great. And thank you for, so there is nothing in the CSR Act which actually prevents you from investing in a collaborative. The reason this is important is twofold. One is that last example Shashank spoke about. Only 50% of Nanhi Kali's funding actually comes from Mahindra. Now, it's a big thing, right? Because it boosts sustainability, it makes it more likely to, have more impact. But more importantly, it reduces the effect of fragmentation. Imagine if that remaining 50% was all doing their own thing, the learning curve would be much lesser. So that's one point to keep in mind. And the second point really is, with the government, sometimes the belief is, look, the government is inefficient. They are like sarkari, like they are whatever it is, all the things that we sometimes think about that. The only one underlining this who can actually have a meaningful effect in the social sector in India is the government. Everyone else is a catalyst. The only one who has the fuel for this vehicle is your tax rupees, which is with the government of India. Everyone else is a lubricating oil, so end of the day, if you feel that CSR is actually the fuel, that would be a classic mistake. Rather, it's a very effective lubricating oil. And so then the question is, okay, where is the vehicle going? How to partner? So in some ways, I think the government collaboration, and if you collaborate with the government, foundations, like Gates Foundation, others, are very open to collaborating with you. We ourselves have been, at the meeting point of corporates, large corporates in the top 10, 20, and large foundations actually coming together. But it needs CSR to actually raise their hand. The other party is actually very eagerly looking forward, but somehow, they don't find CSR actually coming forward, either because of, misconceptions about the act itself, or sometimes just because the need to control everything. If we can get beyond the need to see our name on the door and the need to control everything, we can actually potentially have very powerful collaborations in the sector. And again, this is starting to happen in the next 10 years. 10 years back, there were 2 collaboratives in India. Today, the estimate is there are about 35. 10 years out, it'll be very surprising to have anything less than 100 collaboratives. But the number of CSR participating in them is actually very less. So, just wanted to leave a couple of these factoids. Sorry, please go on. Yeah, it's a great, thank you for sharing that. I'd almost say the big aha happened when Mahindra said, I don't want my name on the door. So after that, what they have done is there is 2 kinds of approaches or archetypes. One is where people say, we also don't want our name on the door. So, let's do it. And you might find Nestle, for example, is one of their key supporters and so on. And then there is another archetype where someone says, look, I want my name on the door, but I'll not change the program. So then, Mahindra has gone to the extent of saying, we don't want our name on the door, and we are okay if you take this and actually put your name on the door, because ultimately what matters is impact. But what is important is the core anchor, the person who created it and underwrote the cost of that. They have been at it for a very long period of time. That anchor should not want the name on the door. So sometimes what happens is, you might have seen the name of the company comes very prominently. What happens is, moment that happens, the mindset of every other funder or CSR is, it's a large company, they have a lot of money, so they don't need any more support. The reality is, the largest company has insufficient funds for any of the problems of India's magnitude. So I think if the anchor can say, I don't want my name on the door, a lot of possibilities will exist. It also then ties back to, if Anand Mahindra did not say, I don't care about that, let's go ahead. So at some level, it has to come from the very top to say, we are okay making a long-term investment in this without our name on the door. Because if it doesn't happen that way, then it becomes too hard for the CSR team to push things forward.
I'm just conscious of the time, so.
Please.
Thank you very much. My name is Hemant Kumar and I am a CSR consultant, independent consultant. I have one question for you. Please excuse me for this. Okay. For convenience sake, I would say the collaboration with the NGOs as partnerships and with other organizations as collaborations. Okay, so let us be first clear on that. There is no problem about partnering with an NGO. So the funder is there, the funder is giving money to the NGO, NGO implements, everything is okay. But when they are collaborating with 2 organizations, today as per the amendments, what happens is any unspent money has to be put into a different account as such. Now, in this case, if both the organizations which are collaborating are not on the same page, one organization would like to put balance money into the account and the other account doesn't want to do that. They are in a fix. So what happens is, very often, the collaborating between organizations is always comes with a pain point as such. So somehow we have to find solutions where we have to really not only just ideologically be on the same page, but also implementing way also we have to be on the same page. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. No, it's a great point you made. And at the end, we'll have some Q&A. But what you said is so valuable, because there's an opportunity and there is an obstacle. If there was no obstacle, it didn't need people as talented as you. But not going after the opportunity because there's an obstacle, our sense is it's a short-term obstacle. At some point, good sense will prevail, but in some time could be as long as 5 years. So the question then is, like sir is saying, how do we make sure we create the right behaviors and try to absorb some of the pressures which are stopping that right behaviors from happening? I know we are short on time, so I'll hand back, and maybe we can try to keep the Q&A as interactive as possible, because it's not just about good behaviors, it's also about avoiding bad behaviors. And the CSR leadership has to do both.
So yeah, and collaborations can come in different shapes and form. Another one that I can quote is a collaborative called Khed Collective. It works near Pune in the Khed Taluka, where Bajaj, Forbes Marshall, and a lot of 25 odd CSRs who are all having factories in Khed Taluka. They come together, they share what they're doing, they try to engage together on designing programs. And then different parts of programs can carry different brand names as well. Because what they had seen was a lot of inefficiency was happening. Same, let's say, school was getting supported by multiple CSRs because it was more like closer to the road. It was easier to go to that school and click a picture, while another one which was remote was not getting any support. So that's something that has been also done. Yeah. And yeah, quickly, if we talk about what the good CSRs do, they learn and adapt in an agile manner. So it's not just about quantitative metrics, but learning from the field, seeing what's working, what's not working, adapting, and sharing it. Anand talked about the Mahindra example where the CEO shared the vision. Ambuja Cement is another example where the foundation shares with the board metrics which can be easily understood by them. So again, the idea is that a program is not like a monolith. It needs to evolve, and CSR can play an important role in evolving that program or creating programs to serve the community. Now quickly, given that the time is up, I'll just go to the 5 superpowers that we had talked about in the beginning. And just wanted again a show of hand from the CSR personnel here. How many of us are using at least 4 or 5 of these superpowers that we have? Okay. So at least we have 3 like really powerful CSR organizations here. And for the others, I think it's more about looking at which ones, like first one is critical. That is something that you have to look at. And then which ones can be activated quickly, which ones can be over a longer period of time brought forward, and how do you get to a stage where you're able to leverage the true potential that you have. I'll stop here. And there were a set of questions. And if there are any more, we can also. So we have 8 minutes. Yeah. I want to bring back one common theme which had come, and then maybe we can open up for additional
Yeah. Well, so one common theme which came from, I think, 3 or 4 people, I'm just combining the theme, is there is the Act. And the Act has certain utilization mandates, which are fairly short-term in nature. Secondly, the Act has certain provisions which makes compliance almost like a default, right? And thirdly, it focuses a lot on the quant metrics because, unfortunately, it pushes in the direction sometimes of false precision. Here is the request to this group. These are all realities and these are all challenges. If there's anyone who can actually navigate these challenges, it is you. So you might have to report. But the key question is, what is the program design that you're doing doesn't have to be exactly what you are going to be reporting every year. So to keep a very simple example, and my friend Arun made this point, if you're not actually creating a 5-year program where you're locking in commitments for 5 years, and for all practical purposes, you are declaring internally that it's a bit like a marriage. You cannot have a marriage if you're saying, look, let's get together for a year. We'll check out at the end of this year. If all is well, you are good, I am good, everything is perfect, we'll continue, otherwise we'll part. I mean, that's great. Maybe that's one, but it'll not be a very fruitful long-term where you are actually invested in each other. So I think in some ways, that is the heart of the challenge in front of the CSR leadership, which is there is a set of short-term behaviors which are already in play. You can create your programs with these superpowers. It'll be great to, we are happy to share notes, we are happy to make connections, we are happy to, share some of the best practices. But we are working with people, I'm sure you, 3 of them are already in this room, who are adopting many of these superpowers, despite, absolutely agree with you, a complicated act. But please do not make the act your Bible. You have to meet it. But you can do more than it. So in some ways, thinking of the superpowers first, and then of course you will have a finance team, you'll have a compliance team which will say, what do you have to do to meet the act? But if you put the act as the Bible and say the act is what I do, then all you'll be doing is compliance and falling far short of the transformational impact CSR could have. So I just wanted to leave that thought, and again, happy to connect on this, my friend Shashank, myself on this. I know there was a question right up front. I'm going to hand the mic to you.
Well, I am Gayatri. I'm the founder and trustee of Waste Impact Trust. Question is, why is waste not an agenda on any one of these CSR programs? Whoever I have gone to, they say that yes, we work in environment, but waste is not part of an environment. Oh, we work in water. Waste is not part of water. Is there a single water body in this world which doesn't have waste in it? Why is it that? I have a major issue. I mean, hands to mouth existence also is not possible for me. I've been trying to work in last 8 years. Can I get an answer for that? Why is it that, there's no visibility? You see waste everywhere, mountains of waste. Why is it that we ignore that? We, as human beings, ignore waste right from it's not in my backyard. I throw it wherever I want to, but it's not mine. I thukofy on every on earth, and I call it my Mother Earth, but I thukofy on it. But all that is fine. Why can't I be supported? Can you please? Yeah. No, I do all that. Waste is not waste. Waste is a resource.
It should come from everybody. Like everybody should treating it as a resource,
Yeah.
and probably then the change will come.
That's the aim of my life. Whatever is left of it, to ensure that people consider waste as a resource and not as a waste.
Well, there is already work being done on that in South India. There is an NGO partner. I'm sure every one of you has got that pamphlet in your bags. It's called Bala Vikasa Trust, who is our partner also. And they are from Telangana originally. And they have been doing yeoman work in the cleaning of the water bodies in not only in Telangana but also in Tamil Nadu. And they are getting support from organizations like CII, etc. So I think, with due respect, ma'am, you have to knock at the right doors. That's all I can say. With due respect.
Well, I have knocked many doors.
Yeah. So, so
Can I tell you
Could
something?
I
Sorry.
request?
My aim is not just waste. I work with communities who work in waste, like waste pickers, manual scavengers. There is a human face to it. If today 20% of the waste is not going into the landfill, 80% is going, 20% is not going, it's because of these communities. But nobody is interested. They are
It's
the
a great
most
point.
marginalized.
We are about to end, so thank you
Yeah.
for sharing. One second, Arun, if I can. This focused session is focused on CSR.
Yes, I'm
I have a
asking
last
CSR.
question. So thank you for the point, and please do connect offline separately. I want to leave in the last 2 minutes a very specific point, which is, do please keep these superpowers in mind. End of the day, CSR is bringing in a lot of new capital into the mix.
Again, waste is
But
set
today,
aside.
today, so I'm just being true to the agenda of this session, which is how can CSR be transformative? One of the things which we want to leave with you is, while there's a significant amount of capital coming into the mix, the capital is not yet achieving its full potential. There are mechanisms by which you all can actually work. And again, one of the topics which could happen is, when you make strategic choices in a few areas, waste could be one of them. But whether it is waste, whether it is something else, do not focus on 25 areas. It is almost certain to dilute impact. If you are going on a CSR journey, do not go on the journey too far without a CEO actually being a strong champion. And there is a way to make that happen. Thirdly, do evaluate what marginal population, and there are women in this room, but I think what is very critical is what Shashank said, only 1% of philanthropic investments directly come with a tag of gender. And that's a very, very small number. Fourthly, there is nothing which stops a collaborative approach. In fact, it can take it to the next level, but it needs, again, the investment and the long-term thinking. And lastly, while the act is very, very deterministic, it is short-term, and it does focus only on quantitative metrics, the real learnings are not only quantitative. A lot of learnings will come on what is the community thinking about. So in some ways, treating the act as a floor, but not as the ceiling. Because the opportunity is immense, but it'll only happen if the people in this room almost take it to the next level there. I want to thank you. I want to thank CSR Box for organizing this. It's also interesting to hear the dilemma CSR is in, because you have such amazing aspirations, but there is also the compliance reality. And do please be in touch with Shashank, myself. We're happy to share notes, make connections, but at the very simplest level, learning from each other is going to be one of the easiest ways to adopt some of these superpowers. So thank you. I know there were many, many more questions, so please continue offline as well. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.